So recently we did a video on Microsoft xCloud and the huge upgrades they made behind the scenes, moving their streaming hardware onto Xbox Series X hardware and the massive impact that made on xCloud. One thing that we found was that it made a massive improvement to load times, like incredible. It moved things from like a minute to 2 minutes of load time on the previous servers through to, under 10 seconds to load a game, which was a massive improvement, and graphics looked so much better. But the massive negative that we found was that input lag. It basically made the servers pretty much unplayable through something like an iPhone or an iPad. Now, a lot of you came back to us and you said that you were having the same sort of issues, but also a lot of people talked about the fact they managed to solve that using a physical controller that was plugged in. Now, through our testing, we were using an Xbox One controller that was hooked up via Bluetooth, so there was obviously some interference there. And that seemed to be the common thing that people called out in the comments. They were saying that when they used it with Bluetooth, they found that it was pretty much unplayable. However, if they used a physical controller that was plugged in, they found it much better. So we decided to test it out for ourselves and see how much of a difference that made. And that's where this comes in, the Razer Kishi. So this has a physical connector that plugs into the lightning port on the iPhone, and we're going to test out and see just how much of a difference it makes in terms of input lag when you're using a plugged-in controller versus something like Bluetooth. So we're going to head on over to the lounge now and see what a difference it makes and whether or not it makes xCloud playable on an iPhone and an iPad. Let's find out, shall we? So this is the Razer Kishi, and basically it's on this kind of like extendable strap here, and it fits the majority of iPhones. So plugs in here using the lightning cable, like so, and then extends to there. So this is the iPhone 11 Pro Max, and it'll fit through to things like the iPhone 10 up, so I wouldn't worry too much about compatibility unless you're using a much older device. Now, as we said, the great thing about this is because it's using that physical connector there should be no latency issues or anything like that, or no Bluetooth interference. So we're going to power up Microsoft xCloud and just see whether or not it makes much of a difference. Now, according to a lot of people in the comments, they are finding it much better when you use a controller like this. Some people have said that it didn't really make too much of a difference, and some people didn't have any issues using Bluetooth, so it'll be interesting to see how this works. Now, first up, if we start up with something like Doom, for example, just because that's what we used in our last test, and we'll see how much of a difference it makes. So, as always, load time's not particularly an issue. Literally just hit the A button there and it is setting it up. Let's see how quickly we get into the game. Now, one thing to note about this controller is it does feel pretty damn good. It's not massively heavy and doesn't add too much weight to the device. Buttons all feel pretty good on there as well. So if you are looking for a decent controller to go with something like your cloud gaming experience, then it's definitely one worthwhile having a look at. The one that Microsoft seemed to be shouting out is the Backbone, so that's also another one to be looking at. We just couldn't seem to get stock of it anywhere in the UK at the moment, so we ended up with a Razer Kishi. Okay, so we are loaded into the game. Let's have a look and see whether or not that latency has disappeared or not. So in our testing when we're using it through Bluetooth, everything looked fantastic. You had absolutely no complaints with that, but it was just kind of moving things around. You could maybe have gotten away with it with some turn-based RPG type games, but anything that required any kind of quick actions or aiming was just absolutely just not going to happen. Right, okay, so we are now loaded into the game. Just kind of get an idea of moving around. Actually, it's definitely better, straight away. I mean, I can kill something there, which is is definitely more than I could do last time. So, get away. Yeah, that's miles better. Literally, it was almost unplayable using something like Doom last time with a Bluetooth controller. You kind of moving to the sides and it was just taking a good few seconds before it was registering the input. This, it's almost instant. There's a little bit of a lag, so hopefully you can see that on the overhead camera there. You can kind of move the thumbstick and then it's taken a little bit of time, but this is definitely playable. I mean, it might be a bit more difficult when you kind of get into some of the more action and fast-paced places, but for the most part, this is actually a much better experience than what we're getting previously. So in terms of a first-person shooter, that's actually not half bad. I've got to say, it is a massive improvement compared to what we had previously using a Bluetooth controller. It's night and day. So we've got fantastic looking graphics, amazing load times, and so far we've massively reduced the input lag by using this physically plugged in rather than using a Bluetooth controller. So we're going to try something else now, so maybe go to an RPG or something just to kind of get a good idea of how they all perform. Okay, so just because it's what we used last time, we'll load up a little bit of Dragon Quest. just to get an idea again how that looks and how it performs and everything else. So far, like we said, with the first-person shooters, so using stuff like Doom, it's actually quite a playable experience. It's not quite as good as using just like a normal console or a PC in terms of that input lag, but actually this is a massive improvement over what we had previously, and it's definitely a playable experience. Okay, so we are loaded into Dragon Quest as well, and straight away the input lag is massively reduced, kind of what we'd expected from obviously our experience with Doom and obviously people's comments as well. So that works so much better. In a previous experience, again, when you're kind of tapping on the analog stick to look around, there was quite a lot of lag. This still is a little bit there, so if I like tap it to go to the side, you can hopefully pick up on that on the overhead camera, but there is sort of like a half-second lag. But for a game like this, that's not an issue at all. It still looks fantastic, and those upgraded graphics and the load times, everything we've got with the Series X hardware definitely makes a massive difference. And having something that's plugged in instead, it is night and day in comparison to using Bluetooth. So yeah, so pretty much to sum up, using something like this, which is plugged into your iPhone instead, is going to make a massive, massive difference to your streaming setup. So it's definitely worthwhile considering. Now, one thing that is worth noting is that even though this does reduce the input lag, it's still there. So there is still a little bit of input lag. So bear that in mind if you're wanting to get that kind of perfect first-person shooter score. It's probably not going to be happening with something like this. However, this brings it a lot closer to that just standard gaming experience that you're probably already used to. It's also worth noting as well that it just seems a bit odd that the likes of Stadia and also GeForce Now don't particularly seem to have that issue quite as much. With Stadia using a Bluetooth controller on any of our devices on this exact same setup, we never really have any input lag. There's obviously a little bit there, but by no means what we saw on Microsoft xCloud. And the same goes for NVIDIA GeForce Now as well. So we can chalk it up to xCloud obviously being in a beta at the moment, and there's definitely things for them to iron out. Fingers crossed they will do that. If they can get the Bluetooth experience anywhere close to what this is, then we will be very happy. However, at the moment, if you are all in on Microsoft xCloud as your streaming platform, or if you get it as part of your Game Pass subscription and you want to be able to use it on an iPhone or something like your iPad as well, then look at getting a physically plugged in controller like this, because yeah, it makes a huge difference. This changes our view on xCloud massively, because beforehand, although it looked fantastic and the load times had improved massively, it just wasn't really playable. You definitely couldn't have had an enjoyable experience, at least with our setup. This makes all the difference. It makes it a playable experience with fantastic graphics and a massive library of games. So yeah, physically plugged in controllers all the way. And it just kind of gives us almost like a little Nintendo Switch that has access to a massive library of games through Microsoft xCloud. So definitely look forward to trying this out. We'll also be having a review of this coming up in the near future, and we'll also do some comparisons of Stadia when it's plugged in versus Bluetooth. And we'll also be doing the same with NVIDIA GeForce Now. So we'll try that out when it's plugged in versus something like a Bluetooth controller. So make sure you hit subscribe, come along for some of those videos in the future. In the meantime, if you've got any questions at all, throw them down in the comments below, and make sure you hit that like and subscribe button once you're down there. We'll be back in the future with some more awesome content, but in the meantime, stay safe and we'll see you soon. Bye.